Now you're very welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. Enda call here with you as we look back on Celtic's 4-0 win against Aberdeen at the weekend. I'm doing that in the company of my two co-hosts, and that is Juco James and Alan Morrison, aka Celtic by Numbers. Guys, you're very welcome along, and welcome to everybody who's watching on YouTube as well. It was another dominant Celtic performance this weekend. 4-0 win at home to Aberdeen. 2 goals from Rio Hatate, an opener from Cal McGregor, and Leila Bada finishing it off at the end as well with a nice work goal from Haksabanovic. I think did most of the dirty work for that goal, getting the cross in, and Leila Bada finishing it in the most Leila Bada way. He is as clinical as we have had for a player who doesn't play as much as he probably likes to. But we'll touch on that later on in the show. Guys, you're very welcome along. How did you find the game at the weekend?
About as expected, I guess. Aberdeen have a very specific way of being awful this season. I mean, for the team with right around the third highest amount of resources in the league, plus or minus with Hearts, they're conceding almost 3 goals per game in their away matches this season, and they have the worst defensive record from an XG perspective in the league. So that's why coming into the game is, again, with the setup of having, as I mentioned last week, the response to Goodwin's tactics at home and, at Pittodrie for them, that they were going to come out, and they sure as heck came out. To put that into perspective, they had, I wrote this down because it was really interesting to me anyway. You have to be, again, total loser like I am. But in that prior game, they pressured us 120 times. So that's kind of, they sat back more and they weren't as forward defensively in aggression. They tried to pressure us 192 times in this game. They recovered the ball 13 times out of 120 in that December game. And for those extra 72 pressures, they came up with 1 more ball recovery. So talk about just tremendous payoff for all of that extra pressure. And they had more than double the counter pressures for 1 more recovery from counter pressing. So yeah, it was a relatively easy game in many regards.
For some perspective going into this game, I know, like, Aberdeen on paper, you never want to rule out a tricky game against them, but going into this game, they were off the back of a 5-0 loss to Hearts, a 1-0 loss to Darvel in the Scottish Cup, 6-0 loss to Hibs, 3-1 loss to St. Mirren. They beat Motherwell last week, but I mean, this is a Aberdeen side, Alan, that they're just way off where they were maybe 2 to 3 seasons ago. They're not the third or fourth best team in the league at the minute. They're more likely going to end up around 7th or 8th, where they probably deserve to based on their form this season.
Yeah, I didn't really know what to expect because they've got virtually a new defence. Pollock, McDonald, McKenzie, completely 3 players that weren't in their defence at the beginning of the season. Ramadani seems to have done quite well for them, and Clarkson had. They brought Shinnie back, but as we saw, I mean, he could barely run. I mean, it was quite, to see him sort of hurtling across the pitch there. He looked like he'd got the same sort of hip flexibility as I've got. So that was quite entertaining. And Johnny Hayes is still their speed monster at the age of whatever old Johnny Hayes is now. But yeah, they went for the sort of tried and trusted sort of 3-5 or 5-3-2 that seems to be the default setting now. But as we've seen, and thank goodness for that, because every week it gives us something different to say. There's a slightly different flavour of it. I mean, it's interesting that somebody's counted how many pressures that they thought they made, because I didn't think they made any. So where they got 192 from, I have no idea. I think maybe we were just toying with them in the sense that you let them get a little bit close to the ball before knocking it off, and does that count as a pressure? I don't know. They certainly weren't putting a lot into it in that sense. They were desperately poor. And again, the other sort of theme that we kind of talked about last week, which is in a game like this, Celtic get 2 goals up early, and then you're not then racking up shots at goal. You're not racking up huge XG. You look at it at the end of the game, you think 1.5 XG, Celtic won 4-0. They must have got lucky. It doesn't tell you anything about the game. And that's why a good example, kids, of why single game XG is can be very, very misleading. But it's another one of those where Celtic were never under any sort of jeopardy until Joe Hart decided he was bored in the second half and thought he'd liven things up a little bit. But apart from that, yeah, they were pretty dreadful. And I think James has covered quite well some of the stats from them. I think there's probably more. I think they probably rank bottom of a huge number of stats in terms of the opposition that we've played, even in Scotland this season, frankly. So yeah, desperate stuff for them. I don't know that Barry Robson's going to be doing himself any favours in terms of improving them in the short term. So it'll be interesting to see where they go next.
Yeah, we want to talk about Celtic as well, but we'll touch on this comment from Ian Fleming. Thanks very much for the super like as well. He says, what do you guys make of the rumours from Australia saying Ange will leave at the end of the season? So this is a story that came in from Andy Marr, who is a veteran journalist in Australia, saying that Ange Postecoglou has decided to leave Celtic at the end of the season. Now, I did some digging on this based on what other people in Australia are saying, and other people in Australia are saying that this guy hasn't got a notion what he's talking about and has no well-placed sources within Celtic or within Ange Postecoglou circles. So I think I'm not going to rule out that Ange will lose or leave Celtic at the end of the season. I think that is probably a realistic possibility that he might, if there's some smart and forward-thinking clubs within the Premier League. I think he would be my number one target. But as for concrete links, I don't think this guy has any at the minute. So I don't think there's anything in his story, but I definitely wouldn't rule it out going forward. But we'll stick with this game then. It was a fairly straightforward win for Celtic, as we've said. But the starting lineup is such an interesting development in Celtic season, because it's been changing so much, but we're starting to see some regularity now as we build towards really important games, especially a League Cup final, which I always think the team before the final is a very interesting one, because you're probably looking at 95% of your starters in the game before are probably going to start in the final as well, depending on the length of time you have in between it. In this case, you've got a week, so I'm going to say that most of the team will be starting against Rangers this weekend. They started against Aberdeen at the weekend. O started up front for the injured Kyogo, but Kyogo was nearly fit. So what did we make of his performance as he beds himself into the team? Now, one thing that I find interesting is that O is being trusted already to start in the team versus Kobayashi and Iwata, who are still coming off the bench and aren't really being trusted to be thrust in as a main starter. Is this something that you see as necessity, James, or is this something you see as trust?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't have a strong feeling on that. How's that for an entertaining answer? Insightful.
Okay, we'll move on.
Yeah, no, he was okay. He wasn't involved that much, which again is not that unusual. It's such a limited amount of time that he's had so far, as we always try to do, reserve judgment. I think he's been fine. I wouldn't personally want him starting this weekend if something were to happen, if Kyogo has a setback or something, but I think it's just too early to tell.
Same for you, Alan, or do you have a different opinion on it?
Yeah, as I said last week, I didn't think he would start, so happy to have got that wrong. It was great to see him get a start and get 70-odd minutes. What did I think of him? I really liked what he gives that's different is his ability to hold the ball up in tight areas, especially in the box. So there's a number of times we were able to feed the ball into him in very congested areas, and he was able to fight off defenders and try and bring midfielders into play as they attack the box. And I think that actually plays very well into how Celtic have increasingly playing since the World Cup break, which I think is to attempt a lot more central passes and to get the ball into the centre of the box from not just from wide positions, but actually from deep positions as well. And I think he fits the profile of the sort of striker you'd need to hold that ball up and do that. And then sometimes, as we saw against St Johnstone, if they get too tight, he's got that ability to spin in behind as well. So I think he's a really interesting player, but obviously I don't want to, I can't jump to any massive conclusions. He actually, his involvement was probably, again, he's more of an all-round striker than Kyogo is. He's happy to come outside the box sometimes. He's happy to get involved in duels. He's happy to link play, which, as I say, is a little bit different. Giakoumakis was limited in that regard. He was good for knocking people around and pulling teams out of shape and bashing into people, and he worked really hard off the ball. But he wasn't. You couldn't really trust him to sort of bring the ball under pressure and bring people into play. This kid looks like he got the ability to do that. So I think he's really interesting. I think he looks, again, on first impressions, like he fits well with the way that we're trying to play, albeit, we want strikers like him to be at the end of things in the box. We haven't really sort of seen that from him yet. I haven't seen whether he's got that sort of Abada timing or that Kyogo sort of rapier-like ability to hit exactly the right spot at speed and meet the ball. So that's yet to be seen. But like James, even if Kyogo wasn't 100%, I'd be astonished if it wasn't Maeda that started. If Kyogo doesn't feel like they can start him in the final.
Mm-hmm. A comment in from Paul Andrew Martin saying that it's a bit different with O because he only really has Kyogo to contend with. Iwata has more players in front of him. And that is true. I mean, Celtic are quite limited when it comes to centre forwards. I know they're sort of rotating Maeda into the centre at the minute, but without that extra man in Giakoumakis, it really is between Kyogo and O for that centre forward position. And, you go with, in my opinion, in a final, you go with your most experienced and the player who has already shown that they can be the difference maker in these games. And Kyogo was that last year with that absolute extraordinary goal, even though he was playing off one leg and half a hamstring at that point in time. So I think it's going to be Kyogo as well in the final this weekend. But I guess we'll talk about the guys who are in front of Iwata, and that is Matt O'Reilly, who came in for a starting place in the team this weekend. Cal McGregor is as well. And then the man that we love to hate on this podcast, and that's Ray Hotate. I mean, we've already ruled him out as, any type of player. So he only got the 2 goals this weekend. He only played Jota through for, an amazing assist if Jota had taken his chance, but it was offside anyway. But I mean, we dislike him on this podcast, so we can't really talk about it, can we?
I can't do it. I'm going to abstain.
Okay, Alan. We'll take it seriously.
He was absolutely.
We'll take it seriously. He was
absolutely extraordinary on the day in terms of a man of the match performance. In terms of his overall play was just tremendous. So as well as the 2 goals. His in terms of his defensive play was good. He won the ball back more than any other midfielder. His recoveries, he was up there higher than, apart from Jota actually, higher than any other sort of attacking players. He was kind of 50-50 on turnovers, which is good for him. He created a couple of chances, 3 passes into the danger zone. He had the highest packing score, which I always like, as you know, on the day. That always kind of sways me in terms of, because it's a good proxy for all-round performance. And that was not just because of his passing ability, but he also got on the ball as well. So his movement off the ball was tremendous. He just seems to be playing with a lot more authority and confidence to his play. And what we want to see is that consistency. That's really what we're hoping for. Because if we dial back to where we were last year, not even this time, probably later in the season last year, when he kind of exploded into the scene with a goal against Hearts and 2 in the derby, and after about 6 or 7 weeks, I think I said on this show, look, he's had these wonderful moments, but his underlying data is not that extraordinary. And actually, he was a little bit like Ryan Kent. You sort of think, oh, that was brilliant, but then they didn't really do anything afterwards, or where was the creation after they beat 3 players and all that sort of thing. So he profiled his data-wise a little bit like that. And if you recall, what I said at the time was, because he started to become some people were criticising him because he was running out of gas after 50 minutes in games. He was looking exhausted, both mentally and physically. He's a young lad. He played a full season in Japan. He'd just come to this country. This was like equivalent of his second ever, professional season. And although he's 25 years old now, we really should treat him more like a 20, 21-year-old in terms of his experience. And what I said at the time was, he's got all the tools. We just need to be patient with him. Okay, and I've not changed my opinion on that, because the way he started this season was similar. But he does seem to me, and I did promise I would do a proper dig on this, but he is improving. So what we've seen in the last couple of weeks, which is a major step forward for me, are two things. One is that what Postecoglou wants is he wants both, either is whatever side the ball's at, the other winger and the eights to supplement the striker in the box, to flood the centre of the box with bodies, to get on the end of low hard crosses. I'm oversimplifying it, but essentially that's what we're trying to do, and get outnumber the team and time good runs into the box. And Hatate, if you look at the four number eights, we've got Moy, Turnbull, O'Reilly, and Hatate. He has the least touches in the box of all of them, and he has the least shots from central positions within the box. Also, so that's the area of the game, one area of the game where he needed to improve. And what's he done? So the last two games, he scored 3 goals from a central position in the box, and not only that, his timing of his run, the sweetness with which he hit the ball low and hard into the corners, absolutely fantastic. So we just want to see more of that, really. And to bring them up to what the other eights have been doing. And the other thing that I liked is, and it might seem a simple thing, is that he stepped up to take that penalty the other week, and that just showed a sense of responsibility. It just showed a sense of confidence and self-confidence, and wanting to take ownership for his performance. Because again, I felt like he's a little bit reserved, a little bit like Maeda had been, and Maeda's suddenly become a lot more assertive in his play. He's taking people on. He's making more aggressive runs. He's trying things that he wasn't trying before. And listen, Maeda's not that much older than Hatate. In fact, he might even be younger. And so these are young guys that need time to bed in. So there's some really encouraging signs from Hatate. I mean, I could go through all the stats that you could dare to throw at me and rank Turnbull, Moy, O'Reilly, and Hatate, and it would disappoint so many people that Hatate would be third or fourth in all of these things. And you can shake your fist at the data cloud and see, I managed to get a cloud computing joke into the show. I knew I would one day. You can shake your fist at the cloud if you want, but and I'm sorry about that, but it's not just me. Let's look at StatsBomb. Okay, so StatsBomb, James tells us every week, StatsBomb have got the most sophisticated models, of any stats company out there, and they've got these on OBV, on ball value metrics. And if you look at those, every Celtic midfielder would be higher on his overall OBV than Hatate, which I'm not particularly a great fan of these OBV metrics, only because I think if you're going to have these aggregated metrics that claim to sort of describe a player in their entirety, they're trying to be everything, a magic bullet almost. You should explain them a lot better than what they have done, and so it's a little bit of a black box to me. So take that with a pinch of salt, perhaps. But what I want to see always with young players is, have they got a good attitude? And Postecoglou's spoken about his thirst to learn, to get better, and we can see that. And is he improving? And I think he is, and I think that's all all we can ask. And as I say, we've seen some really encouraging signs, and that performance on Saturday was absolutely fantastic. And that's what we want to see more of, basically.
Yeah, big time. And I think he was described as a utility player when he first signed for Celtic, and I think we are actually quite. If I were to describe Hatate, it would be a really beautiful utility player, because he's got a long range of passing. He likes to dribble with the ball. He likes to take chances with his passing. He can score a goal the odd time. He can cross the ball. Like he's not really a master at any of the skills of a midfield player like Cal McGregor is, of controlling the pace of a game, or David Turnbull long range shooting, or Aaron Moy at just playing the simple pass. I think Hatate is somebody who tries a bit of everything and has been successful with a lot of it. He also has a little move now. He did it twice during this game, and both of them led the goals. It's a little shift of his body weight to the left-hand side before pulling the ball across, leaving his man for dead, sending him the wrong way, and then bringing the ball forward. He did it in the box before he scored the first goal, and he also did it in the for the second goal when he took on like two players, then nutmegged one. The ball didn't come off, but he still continued on his run. That ended up with the ball coming out inside the box, and then he went in to finish it. So he's trying things, and that was my original argument with all of this, is that, and it's one of the, in my opinion, the downfalls of the statistization. If that's not a word, I don't care. I'm going to use it anyway. It's one of the downfalls of stats in football, is that the fantasy football element has crept into games, and I'm not saying that's what you guys do, because it's not. It's underlying data that you guys look at, but you cannot define, in my opinion, a player like Hatate based only on his stats alone, because he's going to be lower in his packing score. He's going to be lower in the amount of completed passes because he's trying a lot more. And I think that's where it comes in between having analytics and analyzing that data that you're looking at. So, yeah, I think I think he's probably going to be the player of the year by the end of the season if he continues on this form. But we did see how he burned out at the end of last season. So I think it's really just about continuing within himself and continuing to improve and trying to build on the momentum that he has at the minute and bringing that into a big game like the weekend. It's all well and good having this form for 3 to 4 weeks coming up to a League Cup final. If you completely capitulate when it comes to the final, then, you know, I'm not saying it was a waste, but it also, you need to be able to step up when it comes to it. So that's where I stand on Hatate. James, I'm not sure if you want to add anything more before we move on.
Yeah, I mean, what I've said is largely pertains to our midfield players playing this system at a European level. And I don't mean that in the sense of, you know, last 16 Champions League, but basically to be a late threat in the Europa League. You know, that's kind of the benchmark that I've personally set as where I'd like Celtic to get to on a consistent basis. And that means to me that players like Hatate should be posting this kind of dominant performance on a level of regularity domestically that is not infrequent. They should be looking like the best player in the league on the best team. And that's what he looked like this past weekend. But it was also against, as we've already covered, a team that is in complete mess when it comes to defending, in horrible transition. So they made that relatively easy. So I want to see this happen more against better competition. And the other part of this, and again, this is not the game that is going to stress test this, is that one of the big issues that we have against higher level competition is defending in transition. And, you know, you can be the most beautifully attacking creative player. And if you're not going to help in that facet of the game, that can be an issue, particularly within the composition of the overall team. And that was not the game that was going to stress test Hatate's defensive work. And again, if you benchmark these things through time, you know, that's the part of this discussion that has not been really discussed all that much at all, because it's so infrequent domestically. We are so dominant right now against the vast majority of teams domestically. You know, when you look at his defensive performances and you benchmark it, he falls short of like 2018-19 Olivier Ncham, who was the player that was disinterested, and the narrative was he was lazy. And, you know, so that's what we're talking about. His defensive metrics are below that of Rogic last season. And no one ever pretended that Tom Rogic was a European level defensive player when it comes to playing an attacking box to box midfield position. Right. So what I've said is that he has to be a dominant attacking force in order, and display that consistently domestically, in order to kind of carry these other issues that are potentially there at that late Europa League level. Hopefully this is the beginning of him doing that on a consistent basis. And it was. I mean, it was a tremendous performance objectively. But it's the same kind of things that Alan and I look at that raise some of these questions are reflective of that dominant performance, right? They're in his advanced stats from the weekend. This was not something that just dropped out of a helicopter and said, oh boy, he did all this great stuff, and it's not reflected at all in any of the advanced metrics, right?
Yes, exactly.
It was a dominant performance over the weekend, and it was reflected in the same things that have raised some of the questions that we've had. And again, on the pressing side, on the defensive work side, the transition side, we'll find out more this weekend, because we're going to be facing an opponent that, at least in theory, can present more of a challenge than that, abomination of an Aberdeen performance.
Just to add to that, right? Even Aberdeen, as poor as they were, almost wholly in the game, when the few occasions when they had the ball, attacked down their right, Celtic's left. Okay, almost wholly, and they bunched on that side to try and get overloads on that side. And every single team that Celtic play try and attack Celtic down Celtic's left-hand side. And there's a reason for that. There's many reasons for that, okay? It's because you've got three players in there, Starfelt, Taylor, and Hatate, who are the three most likely players to give the ball away. You've got Starfelt, who's the most likely to lose a heading duel, and obviously Taylor's not particularly tall either, right? So as teams attack that part of Celtic, they do it every single game, and that's objectively true. And there's a reason why they do it. And we wouldn't be, doing our jobs, as it were, if we weren't pointing these things out.
Mm-hmm. Just to wrap up this Hatate chat, Paul Diet says in the comments that Hatate will be Ange's first signing when he becomes Chelsea manager in the summer. So we'll wait and see if that happens. Hopefully that's not going to be the case. I would hate to lose one, never mind both at the same time. But and just to wrap up my general thoughts on it, because I see quite a few people are making the sort of Lubo, McStay, Rogic comparison in the comments. I'm not quite. I didn't have the privilege to watch McStay properly in his heyday, so I'm not going to comment on him. I got the tail end of Lubo as well, but I definitely got Rogic. I've said on this podcast numerous times that Rogic was my favorite player. I'm not saying that Hatate is a similar player, but what I'm saying is sometimes you have to facilitate these players into your team, be that defensively like Hatate, be that accepting that you might give the ball away more often than not. But I think these are the players that are going to make the difference in major games. And I guess that's what we're waiting on Hatate to do, is be that difference maker in the games against Rangers and the games in the Europa League or Champions League or whatever. So hopefully we'll wait and see. And I really hope he continues his form into the game this weekend, because if so, that Rangers midfield is not very athletic. So I would really like to see Hatate at his pomp going at the Rangers defense. We are going to preview that game, by the way, later in the week. We're going to do a proper deep dive into it. So that's why we're talking around it. We're not really talking specifically about the League Cup final this weekend. So I guess another talking point here, Alan, you wanted to mention was Iwata, who came off the bench. This is another midfield player that we're not really sure what we're going to get out of him, because he hasn't played a number of minutes to fully get a grasp of what he's going to be or who he's going to be or even where he's going to play on the pitch. So interested to see what you thought about him.
Yeah, I mean, he's the fact that he got a substantial chunk of the game, 27 minutes, I think it was, tells you that the manager's keen to get him involved. And I saw quite a few bits of criticism in terms of, oh God, he just plays it safe all the time. And my goodness, he did play it safe. But again, he's only played about, I can't remember how many minutes has he played for the team, something like 70 minutes. And in 70 minutes, he's completed 120 passes. I mean, that's like Callum McGregor on steroids in terms of controlling the game. And he absolutely controlled a game where Celtic were 2-0 up and then 3-0 up and then 4-0 up. Again, you can foresee a scenario in a bigger game where something like that is going to be incredibly useful. Now, he didn't, there wasn't a lot of creative passing going there. There was a few sort of pack passes, but nothing too ostentatious. If he was ever in any doubt, he tended to kind of come back and then play the ball back and safe and so forth. So I typically take all that on board. But I think the standout thing for me on the 2 times that I've seen him is the extent to which he's trying to dictate other players on the pitch. Now, I don't know how much English he's got. I don't know if he's got any English, to be honest. But you can see from his body language, his gesturing, the fact he's constantly talking to people, he's constantly pointing, that he's trying to sort of help the team, and he's trying to take responsibility. Again, I use that word, trying to take responsibility, take ownership for his role on the pitch to try and sort of dictate the middle of that field. And that speaks to me about someone who's got, again, a huge amount of sort of self-confidence to be able to come on to the team who's winning easily every week, to come on and start telling people what to do. I think is pretty neat. So, so far it looks like he's got the composure and the skills to back it up. But as James says, no way has that been stressed in any way, really. So, it's very, very early days with him. But I do think it's interesting the extent to which he's trying to, essentially showing, you call it old-fashioned leadership skills if you want, but he's got that sort of mental characteristics, which, again, I'm just sensing a slight stiffening of Celtic's mental resolve in terms of the personnel that have been brought in. I mean, Alistair Johnson is a pretty tough competitor. Iwata looks like a tough competitor. Maeda and Hatate are growing in self-confidence and taking on more responsibility. And that, to me, that's all encouraging in terms of the overall sort of confidence within the squad. And I know these aren't sort of data measurable things, but they're encouraging in terms of the sort of mental health and strength of the group, if you like.
Yeah, I'd almost throw O into that as well. I think he's already shown he has a bit of bite in him as well during his brief plays so far. A lot of people in the comments pointing out that Hatate has already stepped up when he scored 2 goals in the game against Rangers, his debut. I that's a fair point. It is a fair point. What I mean is more consistently. I don't mean a once-off game when nobody knew who he was. I mean, now that people know who he was and are targeted him, can he be the dominant force in the midfield? And I think he's good enough to be. That should be my main point that people are hearing. James, I guess with Iwata, it is an interesting one because Ange has spoken about trying to get him more minutes, but I don't want to pigeonhole him already as a safe player, but is it potentially down to our opposition that we're playing and the style of play that we're coming up against, that maybe he's just not that suited to being in the team that's going to have the ball for 70% of it and be on the attack 70% of it? Maybe he's more suited to the weekend, for example, or a better standard opposition where Celtic need to have a bit more control in the build-up rather than just, being the attacking force for 90% of the game.
Yeah, the inherent challenge is that, Callum McGregor seems to have a genetic disposition against not playing every single minute, if at all possible. So, which again, fair enough. That's been his, that's how he's been for a number of years now, outside of injuries that have forced him out. So, if McGregor has to stay in, which seems to be kind of the way that it's going to work, then that creates a question as far as shape, role, because I went over this when we signed Iwata. His profile was oddly efficient. I mentioned at the time, meaning that his benchmarking of how controlled he is in his passing was a real outlier in Japan. But that he wasn't all of that creative. So that he was more in line, and his defensive work, his ball recoveries, his tackling. So he was more of a throwback to like a, first 2 seasons under Rodgers, Scott Brown iteration, right? He's closer to that type of player than, someone who's going to orchestrate from deep and pick out, tremendous passes at distance and that kind of thing. So, how his that position fits in relative to playing against bunkered in, 5-3-2 opponents when McGregor's going to be one of the attacking eights is an interesting question. But this weekend I could see him playing more of a role because we've been moving more towards kind of a hybrid double pivot at times against higher quality opposition this season at times. So, we get a goal up. Could I see him and McGregor kind of forming that dual pivot with one of the other midfielders still advanced in more of a number 10 role, that kind of thing. I think he's extremely well suited for that in that kind of double pivot role next to somebody like McGregor. So I think that's ultimately the question, is how do those two kind of interplay with each other and how they're utilized, and where's the creativity in midfield going to come from, the chance creation with those two playing together, because like I said, it doesn't look like we're going to get a lot of Awada without McGregor, which would be the natural kind of logical swap, particularly with Moy being available hopefully in coming weeks. So
I think Iwata, disregarding his defensive side of things, is what I had predicted Aaron Moy might have been brought in for, to be controlled within the midfield in the final 20-30 minutes. And I'm not saying that's what his future is going to be long term. I just mean this season. I think that's what we're going to see him do, and potentially in next season when it comes to the Champions League, just to have that little bit more control, because Celtic were done on the transition, and you can't transition against a side that keep the ball better than Celtic keep the ball. And I think that's a key point for Celtic, is not being done on the build-up and not being done on the transition. And how do you do that? Well, you get a midfield player who is so comfortable at keeping the ball in tight situations. And it's very early doors, but I think that's what Owada looks like to me as a midfield player. And just to finish off this game then, Joe Hart had a few hairy moments, we'll call them. He looked like an absolute fish out of water when he was caught outside the box of that goal, or not the goal, just a mess of a situation defensively. But I mean, look, Joe Hart hasn't really put a foot wrong most of the season, but these are the mistakes that you're going to see for a goalkeeper who, well, number one, has never really played the role that he has played before, and number two, doesn't really have to do it all that often. So, I mean, I'm not sure I'd want to be too harsh on Joe Hart here, lads.
No, I mean, I was sat watching in the first half, when I was watching the first half, thinking, Joe Hart's been pretty quiet, obviously, the last few weeks, not had to do a lot. This is all good. And then I think he just looked at Starfelt and thought, you've not passed it to centre forward yet. Must be my turn. I think I'll do that. I'll do it twice just to show that, I've got a creative bone in my body. So, yeah, when we come to the proper sort of, I'm looking forward to James on Thursday, if we get together to preview the League Cup final. He's our goalkeeping expert, and do a compare of McGregor and Hart. But no, listen, Hart's been pretty solid. I think, my summary of him is he does what you'd want your goalkeeper to do. He's pretty safe, actually. So that was kind of uncharacteristic of him in recent weeks, certainly. But yeah, hopefully he's got that out of his system, shall we say? And that's kind of any lingering complacency has kind of been shaken from him.
Yeah, well,
I think
McGregor
it was
actually. Sorry, I was just going to say McGregor was added into the Hall of Fame during the week, So,
brilliant.
I mean, is Joe Hart going to be in the Celtic Hall of Fame? Do Celtic have a Hall of Fame?
I don't know. Do we?
Not that I'm aware of, but
Yeah.
So I think it was further evidence as to why what was advertised when Ange arrived, as far as how he used his keepers in Japan, and having looked at it quite extensively, how he did use his keepers in Japan, has been changed dramatically, meaning that there's a reason that Joe Hart is not 35-40 yards away from goal, out playing sweeper keeper and just outside the center circle in splitting the center backs, as Ange's keeper had done in Japan. So he's smartly being utilized in a way that doesn't expose that issue with any kind of regularity, and we get flashes on occasion, like we did last weekend, that is a fresh reminder as to why that's the case.
I mean, I fall on the Joe Hart side of things, where last year his leadership skills and his experience were absolutely vital in that resurgence of Celtic. I definitely think he played a major role in that. And going forward, I'm like, is he ideal? No. Is there anyone out there that is within our price range? but very, very slim pickings when it comes to goalkeepers at the minute. So, and the fact that Seacrest isn't getting much game time is, as expected almost, because, we looked at him before he signed as well, or when he signed, and kind of the same player, really, just a younger version. So I don't think he's going to be taking Hart's place anytime soon. So I think he's fine. He's safe, and he's certainly safer than McGregor, who's in the Hall of Fame. So, you got to give him that. So just before we finish off this podcast, the League Cup final is this weekend, Sunday at 3:00. And the weirdest of weird press conferences today. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It was Ange Postecoglou sat next to Michal Beale and
Ricky.
Yeah, and I don't know why they did it. It's such a bizarre situation, and both managers clearly look uncomfortable about it. But I mean, there's not much else to say other than I just don't know why they did it, except for just for the shits and giggles. And I mean, it says a lot when one of the news articles about it doesn't say anything about what was said in the press conference. It just says they looked incredibly awkward.
No, it's just, I mean, a quick scan of the, and I'm doing this so you don't have to, okay? A quick scan of the Daily Record online tells you all you need to know about how this week's going to go. We've got stories about how Mickey Beale, exudes calm, how Ange Postecoglou is going to be leaving for Leeds, how James Tavernier is going to be seizing the moment, how Rangers have trebled their revenue in the last 4 years or whatever, or something like that. And on, and how Carl Starr felt as owed money by Ruben Kazan. That's another bad, gloomy story. How Malik Tillman is so much better than Bayern Munich thought, and he's working. It's an absolute steal if they can get him. And on and on and on and on it goes. So this is what we got, another 5 days of all this jollity to come. All very balanced, of course.
Yeah, of course. And to keep it balanced, we'll just finish off with a discussion point around the two managers, because this is, again, new territory for a Rangers manager in a final against Celtic, against somebody who has Celtic in a position where they've been consistent across a long couple of months and have shown that they can win trophies. There's players amongst the Celtic team that have won trophies already, and that's going to give them confidence to go for more. So, I know this is a once-off game and they all change, but I still can't help but feel that Celtic are the overriding favourites for this game. And that's coming from a place of total neutrality, of course.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, the bookmaking odds reflect that. The relative disparity in performance levels throughout the season. I mentioned when Beale was hired that my expectation was you wouldn't get a material shift in their underlying performances, and you really haven't. They've had better results. They've been finishing a little bit better since his arrival. Maybe that's coaching, who knows, but at least, if you want to be charitable, that could be part of it. But this is, I mentioned before we went live, assuming that we play them in the Scottish Cup at some point, we have 4 games against them. And that's it basically for 6 months in a competitive game against a legitimate European level opponent, until we get somewhere in August, where the next game is probably against them before we get to the Champions League, hopefully again next season. So that's 4 times basically to kind of test some of these things that we talk about incessantly on this show about stress testing some of these things. And the vast majority of indicators going into this reflect that we really should be a strong favorite. Goalkeeper position being one of them, and the way that the relative performance levels of the 2 most likely keepers have been. So, yeah, it's we'll talk about it more on Thursday, but I hate completely underestimating the opposition, particularly when, in the grand scheme of things, we're relatively close in resources. So and squad talent to a large degree. And I say close, I mean in the neighborhood. We're it's not Man City versus Nottingham Forest, that kind of disparity. So I get analytically, this is you get nervous just as a supporter and all that stuff in these weeks, but just analytically, I mean, this is one of the 4 left that are like a big measuring stick as far as moving forward and how much better we can get until Ange inevitably leaves in June, apparently.
Well, he's off to Chelsea.
Hired a new manager today.
That's right.
Anything to add on before we finish up?
Yeah. Listen, we'll cover it in more detail on Thursday. You talked about the 2 managers. I've had great fun with Mickey since he joined. For someone to be given their first chance in management and to walk out on it after I don't know how many games, not many. He's got some self-confidence. Let's see if that's backed up by actual ability, because and my goodness, does he talk? Goodness me. Rabbit, wabbit, on and on and on and on. So can he live up to his wabbit? I don't know. Well, I guess again we'll see. It's interesting. Ange, clearly had a lot of respect for Giovanni van Bronckhorst as a person, as a manager. I don't quite detect the same level of. I think Ange is a pretty good barometer of people that you should or shouldn't respect, in my view. In terms of the actual football, I'm looking forward to James's. I think James, you're probably doing a bit more of a compare of Mickey Beale's time versus Celtic's sort of form. Looking forward to that. I mean, most of the models, most of the sort of expected points models, expected goals models, have Celtic about 15 points better over a season. So that's a pretty substantial gap. But we all know there's the VAR factor, the Walsh factor, the Beaton factor, the variability factor. It's a cup tie. Things can happen. So yeah, we'll get more into it on Thursday.
Mm-hmm. Mickey Beale's replacement at QPR was actually sacked today, Critchley, after just I think it's less than 13 games, so didn't go very well for him. So that's completely irrelevant to this game. I just thought the people might want to know just how good a job Mickey Beale was doing at QPR.
That'll suddenly spun into what a great job the previous,
just so people know what the headline at on the news headlines are going to be tomorrow morning is this shows how good a manager Mickey Beale was, because his replacement at QPR was sacked after just 13 jobs. But look, we're going to preview this game in more depth on Thursday, because it is the first final of the season, and it's a huge one as well. So double pods this week on the Huddle Breakdown, and it'll be live here on YouTube. If you want to get that, you can subscribe to the channel below and hit the like button as well. If you're commented, hit the like button as well, because it all helps the algorithm for more people to see the show. And if you want to get it after the fact, it's available on podcast, on Spotify or iTunes. And if you want to help us out on iTunes as well, leave us a review, whether it's good or bad. Give us abuse or absolutely call us the most beautiful souls in the world if you want. But either way, just leave a review on iTunes if that's where you listen, and that'll help us boost on the algorithm as well. Alan, James, thanks very much, and we'll see you on Thursday.
Take care.